And we are recording. So the first thing I'd like to do today is try to critique things. So I wanted to share my screen because I've got lots and lots of things to look at. And so I'm going to put this up. Does anybody recognize this mask? Would anybody take possession of this mask?
That's mine. It's Raya.
That's Raya. Okay. So Raya has the one that has, what am I going to call this? It's oval. It has texture, kind of an overall texture. It's got the uneven eyes. I have to gotta write down some notes here so that I can go back and retitle this file Raya's mask, so that then I can send it back to you so that you've got something to upload for homework, for this project. Okay, Raya. Did we get to critique this at all last week?
No, I don't think so.
Would you like some feedback on this from the learned people here, our considered opinion and all of that kind of stuff?
Sure.
Oh, okay. Well, I would like the rest of you nice people to unmute your mics and chime in whenever you want about this mask. So this one looks a lot like what we were talking about with the Picasso Cubism portraiture that he was doing. I see eyes being uneven and not in the same plane. I see some interesting abstraction and artistic license taken with the nose, especially with the bridge of the nose working into the eyebrow and brow bone, which is really interesting. It's a super elongated, becomes a very linear element working through the composition down to the tip of the nose and the nostrils. And I'm also seeing that the mouth is in a lovely crooked way, also jammed down quite near the bottom of the oval, taking a little bit of a page out of the African mask making traditions that we looked at in the first week of the quarter. So you are borrowing and mixing and matching from several different traditions. Very good. Do you want to tell us anything about what you were thinking about while you were making this mask?
Yeah, I don't really know. I just kind of started throwing things together, and that's how it ended up. And yeah.
When you were making this mask, was it a playful experience or was it a stressful experience?
I would say it was a little bit more stressful just because I don't know, the whole cubism thing. It's hard for me to get. Like, I like how it looks and stuff, but I don't know how to do it.
It is an awful lot for us to show you a demonstration, a PowerPoint, a book, some kind of a reference, and then say, go make this. Go try to make this in the style of this, when you're not familiar with the style and you haven't lived with it long enough that it's really become part of your experience. That's unfair for us to do. But you are working formally with some of the ideas expressed in those synthetic cubist portraits of Picasso. And I appreciate you trying and working on this. You're working outside of your comfort zone, and that's pretty cool. I don't have the participants list up. Is there anybody else who wants to chime in at this point? Uh-oh, I lost my screen. I lost
so
my...
This is Aurora.
Yeah.
I was just gonna say that I really like the way that
Where is it? Okay, here it comes. Yes.
Okay. So I really like the way that the line of the eyebrow into the nose is kind of mimicking also like the rest of the mask shape, because like that lower eye is lower and then the mouth also kind of tilts at that same angle. So it's almost like you get a full fluid motion through the piece, even though that everything is at different places. So
Oh,
and it
that's
looks
a
very
wonderful
suspicious.
observation. I didn't notice that, but thank you. Yeah, we've got these guys at an angle, and the mouth is at a very similar angle. And then, if nothing else, this kind of also pulls us up into an angle too. That's wonderful. Good observation. How do you guys feel about the texture?
I wanted to ask about the texture. I was wondering how you got that texture. It's different. It's cool.
Yeah, so I basically took, I don't know how to explain it. It's like a little brush thing. Um, and I just started like hitting it and making little holes, and then that's the texture that came out of it. So
So is this your hairbrush from the bathroom?
no, it's not a hairbrush. It was like I had like a nail kit that my mom got me for college, and I don't use any of it. So I was trying to find some stuff to make a texture, and it's like a little nail brush
Was
thing.
it like the buffer brush for like under the nails and stuff?
Yeah, that's what it is.
Got you, got you.
Okay. Because I thought maybe you were a full-on artist who were just so into the creative process that you would grab anything, even if it was like a personal item like your own hairbrush, and just jam it into the clay, you know, in full abandon, full creative artistic abandon, and maybe wash it out later on, but probably not, you know, just use it on your hair with clay residue in it, because that's what we do, you know. There's a, you know, I'm recording this, so I probably shouldn't tell you a bad joke, but there's an old joke that says, what's the difference between a painter and a sculptor? And the punchline is, the painter takes the dishes out of the sink before she pees in it, which tells you that, you know, mostly painters and sculptors, you know, live in their own studios and they live in their own squalor. And but the idea is that painters are always just a little bit more sophisticated than sculptors, who are seen as much more knuckle draggers in the art hierarchy and continuum. But, you know, if you have to explain a joke, then it's not really funny anyway. So getting back to this, thank you very much. I think we got to move on, or I'm going to run out of time and I won't be able to make, you know, good use of what we're doing today. Where did I write this stuff down? What page did I possibly write your information down? Because now I can't find it. I can't believe it. Oh, there it is, right there, Raya. Okay.
One last thing while you're talking, looking for your page, I really like that there's no texture from the eyebrow to the nose, and then there's texture almost everywhere else. I appreciated that.
It is nice to have different textures in different places, and some forms not have texture. That's good. And, you know, it even is in keeping with what's going on with the whites of the eyes and the eyeballs too, because they're smooth too. So to have some smoothness there and have that repeated in a couple other places is nice. And I was interested in the linear texture that's on the one eyebrow, and that it didn't get replicated in some way up here where this form kind of morphs into an eyebrow form up there. Raya, any ideas about why there's linear texture over here and not linear texture over here?
Yeah, I don't really know. I just kind of, I don't really know.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much. We're going to stop sharing that one, and I'm going to go try another one because I'm having so much fun with this, and it's so, you know, it's so successful. So this came in shoved under the door or over the transom. Dylan, is this yours? He's got to unmute his mic first.
It is.
So would you like to speak to this at all? Tell us anything about your creative process, what you were thinking about, and then I have to I have to admit something to you after you get done telling us just a little bit about this piece.
Well, I looked up like abstract paintings, and then there was this one lady that has like a painting, and it has one eye, and so I kind of like the one eye kind of thing. So.
And do you know the story of the Cyclops, or you know, that part of the Iliad, or is it the Iliad or the Odyssey? I forget. I guess it's the Odyssey.
It's the Iliad.
It's the Iliad. Okay. So have you heard of Cyclops before? The large monster with one eye?
I have heard, yeah, but I've seen like the Percy Jackson series, so
Okay.
that's where I got it off of.
Okay, I am going to write down Percy Jackson and look that up so that I'm familiar with the series too. Okay, so one eye dominating the upper register of the composition. You've got this nose, and you know, this nose is very human, but it's also very chunky, and you know, kind of looks like kind of a middle-aged man nose of somebody who might be working real hard, you know, middle-aged, hardworking, blue collar, possibly fighter kind of person. It's a little beat up. Now I came in here because there wasn't a whole lot of definition around some of your elements. And so I took a liberty that I hope you'll forgive me for. I took the wooden trimming stick and I just made a few deft incisions kind of around the eyes and underneath the eyebrow. And I tried to sharpen up the details around the nose a little bit so that it was a little bit sharper transition from the cheeks into the nostrils and into the nose. And I also tried to sharpen up just a little bit around the lips so they read a little bit more as lip forms differentiated from the skin around them. And so I used a line making tool to make some incised lines in certain places. I tried to not do too much so there wasn't a continuous contour line around each shape, but just the little bit of a gesture here and there of a linear form that when you're when the viewer's sense of perception, you know, looks at that, you kind of fill in the dots, you connect the dots, closure happens, and then you can kind of see the lips a little bit in more contrast to the forms around them. You can see the eye just a little bit better in contrast to the forms around it. I hope I didn't hurt your feelings by doing just a little bit of defining on your sculpture. But I thought you had a really good sculpture that just needed a tiny little bit of definition to get the details to pop a little bit. Is that okay with you? Because it's still wet and I can go back and erase some of those lines if I've really offended your sensibility.
No, it's fine. I like it. I think when I was hollowing it out and I flipped it over, I think it kind of got squished. So that's probably why.
It got squished. I also I took the liberty of building up the tip of the nose a little bit because it looked like it had gotten squished. And so I just assumed that it got flattened out a little bit. I also flipped it over and looked at it and it needed a lot more hollowing on the back side. So I also took the liberty of hollowing out just a little bit more on the back side and making a provision for a hanging device behind the forehead. So if you get an A on this thing, I get half of the credit because I did a lot of work on this damn sculpture, I'll have you know.
Thank you.
Oh, you're so welcome. I do like the rough and ready random texture that's on here that's part of the additive process. I don't know if you applied any more texture to it, like by beating on it with another stick or something, because some of these textures look like the corners of a stick or a 2x4 or something. But I just wanted to compliment you that I do like the randomness of the texture in the overall piece.
So on that, I used the little flat piece that you gave us.
Yeah.
The little flat, and I guess like around the nose and the mouth kind of area, I couldn't get to as much.
Yeah.
And it's kind of rugged there.
Yeah. Well, so with the flat metal rib, were you trying to smooth some of the textures?
Yeah, because the last mask that I did was kind of rough, and I didn't do anything to it, and it was just by my fingers.
Okay.
I was just trying to do something new.
So in the forehead and the cheekbones and maybe on the nostrils and the tip of the nose, I can see more smoothing. And then, yes, I do see a little bit more additive texture now in some of the crevices and places that are hard to get to with a large tool. So I get that, but the overall texture effect works for me. So I just wanted to acknowledge that for you.
Thank you.
I got to keep going because I'm running out of stuff. So I got to stop sharing this one and then I got to go to another one because they're so fun. Oh, look at this. Who's this? Okay. Does this ring anybody's bell? Does this belong to anybody here in the chat?
That one's mine.
Who's that? Is that Christopher?
Christopher.
All right. Mr. Christopher, tell us a little bit about this guy. I see you've got the third eye concept going. That looks like fun.
Yeah. So I started this one around the same time as the first mask.
Yeah.
So there's not a lot of like abstract in it, but so I tried to fix that later down the line by making the mouth a lot bigger, and I built up the nose. You can't really tell from front facing, but it's pretty big from the side. But I don't know. I didn't really think much about it. I kind of just, as I worked on it, thought, oh, this could be cool, and then did it. I don't really think much when I'm doing it.
Well, I want to caution you guys. I do think that there's a lot of thinking that's going on. Sometimes it's not a conscious thinking that has a narrative with a whole bunch of concepts, running in it. But there is an unconscious thought process that's always happening when you're sculpting. And sometimes that's okay. It's kind of a stream of consciousness, creative process that, doesn't have, paragraphs and concepts and things that are up in the front of your mind, but they're things that are in the back of your mind that are kind of part of the process. For instance, I really like these really big arcs that you've got for the eyebrows and creating the eye socket. And then you were right, coming down here to the mouth and seeing the enlargement, the elongation of that, but also a curve that's real similar to what's happening in the upper area of the composition. And so that's really cool. Formally, that helps to hook up and link visually the top and bottom of the composition together. Now the tongue, all right. The tongue is doing a tongue thing. That's very, very fun and very cool. I guess, when I get over myself looking at the tongue sticking out, when it does kind of come down and come to a point a little bit, somehow the size of it and the shape of it is very similar to this tiny little third eye that's up here in the forehead. So even these two elements tend to echo each other somehow in the composition, which is, a nice feature. That's a nice design feature that you've added to the piece.
Thank you.
Yeah. Overall, the texture is fairly blended, smooth and blended texture. So you have addressed texture by getting rid of it for the most part and making a smooth texture. But smoothness is a texture too. So I'm not gonna get too nuts on you about that. You know what? Even the shape of the lower eyelid here and here is kind of like the shape of the lower lip down here. So there really is a lot of formal agreement or echoing between the eye forms and this mouth form down here. So that's pretty cool.
It's Aurora, by the way.
Yeah.
One thing that I really like, and I don't know if you did this on purpose or not, but the eyelids on the two like main eyes of the mask are kind of like almost closing over the top, but then the third eye is constantly open, and I like that you didn't like mimic that lower lid on the third eye as well, because it fits with the like third eye view. But I don't know, I really like this mask.
Thank you.
So is that third eye reference to the soul or the spirit or something? And if it's open more than the other two, does that make some kind of a, I don't know, cosmic statement about whether we're more open to spiritual things, even if in our daily lives our eyes are somewhat closed?
Maybe.
I'm just trying to throw you a bone there. Something to think about. Something to think about. I have to stop this one too because I got to keep going. Gosh, we're almost halfway through this thing already. Let's see who is next. Oh, let's do this one. That's gonna be fun. Ha ha! Now this is half dry, so you'll have to forgive me because as the clay dries, it goes from a darker color of clay to a lighter color of clay. So try to ignore the lightness in some of these protruding elements and try to look at the entirety of this in its texture and also some of the protrusions here. And Aurora, if you want to tell us about this piece, that would be fantastic.
Okay, so when you said we needed to do a more abstract piece that pushes us out of our comfort zone, my first thought was like, okay, so I need to do something with a ton of texture and with a lot of like additive pieces because it scares the heck out of me to cut pieces off and hollow them out. So I did that with this. I took inspiration from treants, which are these like tree creatures from Lord of the Rings and D&D, because I'm a huge nerd. And so I did that. I tried to make sure that if even the eyes that are close in proximity were at kind of different angles. And the nose is giant. You can't really tell from the front view, but the side view of the nose, it's big. And then, yeah, I'm going to talk a lot about this piece though, because it's just so much. But the little holes that are all over it that I know you've seen are actually going to have like actual pieces of tree put into them when they're done. I'm also going to get moss to make a beard out of, and he'll be painted like a pine tree basically. I used wood to press in texture throughout the mask, like actual pieces of wood, and a pine cone to do the eyebrow texture. There's a lot going on. But pretty much everything that's sticking off of it had to be cut off, hollowed out, and then put back on. So I hope it's drying well.
It's drying really well. It's drying better than your first mask. And I'm just wondering if you did scratch and slip all of those mating surfaces and put them back together, there's no cracking. It's really holding together very nicely.
Yeah, I think the difference between this mask and my first mask was my first mask I spent weeks doing because I was trying to get it perfect. And so everything dried at different times. And this mask I did in about a day and a half and got it all done, and then decided I had to stop touching it or I would ruin it. So yeah, but I did scratch and slip everything. So
Okay. You also indicated last week a concern about some of the wood chips and bark fines and things that were still stuck in the clay. And I just want to tell everybody that anything that is a combustible material will burn out in the kiln, and it'll just become ash. So it's something that we'll be able to sweep out, blow out, whatever. It won't hurt anything, and it'll be fine burning it out in the kiln. I never have any problem with any combustible materials in the kiln, so that's fine, and it's not an issue for us technically anyway. So I was wondering if Paula was around there, because Paula always has opinions about stuff, and this is one of those, you know, uncomfortable, out of your comfort zone kind of masks. I'm just wondering if this was resonating with you at all.
Aurora is like my sister sculptor. We both are like smooth as a texture, and it's really, really a challenge to push ourselves that hard. I love it. It reminds me of Groot in yeah, you guys know the movie.
Guardians of the Galaxy.
Yeah, Guardians of the Galaxy.
All right. Well, very good. Okay. I'm gonna have to call. Yeah, go ahead.
I just wanted to make a comment on it. I really like how you use like the actual elements that you were inspired from, like tree bark and like pine cones and stuff, and use that to get the realistic texture and bring more like realism and life to it, and still keep the abstract element to it.
Thank you. I've been watching a bunch of YouTube videos of like other sculptors, and I saw a lady use tree bark to give like a tree texture in a background of one, and I loved it. So when I was making this, I really thought about that.
Well, very good. I'm gonna do one more. We gotta do it fast, but I don't know if we can do this fast or not. So I think this is Catherine's. Is this Catherine's?
No.
No.
No, it's mine, Elizabeth.
Elizabeth. Oh my
Yes.
gosh. Okay.
That is
Okay.
absolutely awesome.
Well,
That's
thanks.
right. Catherine's still coming in. Okay. So Elizabeth, you're gonna have to tell us a story about this.
Well, I don't know. I just kind of was like, I was watching one of my favorite TV shows. I'm not gonna say what TV show because I don't remember now. But I was watching a TV show, and then all of a sudden I was just like, okay, I have an idea. And so then I just kind of started making it, and I kind of wanted to go more towards like a wrinkle effect with the side piece on the left side. But then I wanted it to like definitely not be symmetrical in any way, except for like the pupil part of the eyes, I guess you could say. But yeah, I just kind of was like, I don't want anything symmetrical. So there's really nothing that is like even except for like the lines in the teeth, but even then they're still not really symmetrical. So except for the eyebrows, like the eyebrow part, they definitely are more symmetrical. But yeah, I just kind of was like, I don't want symmetrical at all. So because I like that's kind of my thing too, and I'm like Aurora, and I like the smooth part. So yeah, it's kind of just me stepping out of my comfort zone.
Oh, I see. Well,
It
I don't know
turned
if
out
any
really
of you guys
well.
ever saw Ren and Stimpy from the 1990s, but this is one of those grotesque like stills from Ren and Stimpy.
It definitely is. I love it.
I know what you're talking about.
And I don't know if they do this in other animated things like SpongeBob or something like that. But I really like the grotesque nature of it, because you're way pushing boundaries on all of this stuff. And so let's just try to see, we've got the nose kind of morphed right into the mouth here. So we got these things that are kind of working as nostrils and as a nose form, and it flows straight into teeth. And this thing that's happening here with the wrinkles in this cheek area over on this side, running right up into the multiple circular areas around the eye is really cool. And then this idea of multiple circular, I don't know, eyelids or eyelidy things or wrinkles or whatever the heck you're calling these things is really super interesting. I haven't ever seen that before. Is that just something that came to you in a bad dream?
Well, no, it was just kind of like I had an idea of like I wanted it to look aged. That's kind of what I was going for, but then it kind of just turned into this weird thing that I have no idea what it is. But yeah, no, I was going for more of like a sleepless look. And when like people are tired, they have like bags, but I wanted to like accentuate the bags and stuff like that. And then it just kind of, yeah, kind
Okay,
of
well, as an older person, you're hurting me with this.
I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. I'll try not to get like, I don't know, defensive or sensitive or something like that. No, this is a fabulous piece. It's asymmetrical. It's way outside the box, and good on you for giving this the attempt. It's very good.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So let me stop sharing for a minute and start sharing this. Because since I don't have my PowerPoint presentation up, I just wanted to try to talk about these weird kinds of sculptures. So I'm going to try to build one in front of my little chest here while I'm talking to you guys. So the next piece that we're going to try to get underway this week is this thing that my professor when I was in college called an abstract freeform sculpture. Now that's not a very apt title. It's not a very technically correct or helpful title, but it's kind of in its own way an abstraction, because this is kind of abstract. It's definitely not naturalistic or representational. It is free form, and the concept is to try to do this in an additive process where we're going to build clay. I should probably bring in my bag of clay so that you see what I'm doing here. Additive process using pieces, I don't know, that are about the size of a baseball, and trying to slap them together, because I didn't want you to just take the clay out of the bag and just do this, but we could probably do that too. But the problem with doing that is that then you've got a large rectangular solid chunk, and how do you break up the rectangle? And so most people are not comfortable with tearing form apart and then starting to play with the idea of how to move these forms around to try to make them more organic flowing forms, and how to break it up and how to get movement and bending of forms and that kind of stuff. So usually it's nice to take the clay and just start kind of working with it. This is the stuff where we should really have done this the first thing, because you can squish the clay through your fingers and you can feel its plasticity, and it makes happy marks in the clay. It records perfectly everything from your fingertips and fingers, because the clay has perfect plasticity. In fact, the idea of plastics in the 20th century, chemical plastics, And the word plastic comes from the Italians talking about clay for the last 1,000 years or so. And the idea of the plastic nature of something is that it has, you know, no material memory like foam rubber or steel or anything else that you might be working as a material, as a craftsman. Things that will spring back or resist any kind of pressing into them and changing their shape. Clay doesn't resist. Clay, when it is moist clay, it is just completely wonderful and yielding. It has plasticity, and so we can kind of sculpt with it, and it's great that way. So the idea is, you know, trying to, again, get way outside of your comfort zone with this and be building something that has movement to it. And usually movement comes with curves and S-curves and that kind of stuff. And so we would be playing with this process of, you know, adding clay in one spot and, you know, pulling clay away from another spot to try to get movement happening in clay. And I have to, I'm now sculpting on the back side of the clay that's I can't see because I can only see it in the camera in the computer screen. I've never sculpted like this before, but it's kind of fun because I can see my side of the clay, and now I can see your side of the clay. Whoops, your side of the clay. And so that's kind of interesting to me because then I can start seeing the movement that I'm interested in and seeing that kind of organic movement in the clay. And then when I turn the clay 90 degrees, then it's, oh my God, it's still all in the same plane. And so how do I get it broken out of the plane from this direction? And that's kind of an interesting, you know, concept too. How can I get some movement happening, you know, this way? And so that's what we're going to be looking at, is trying to build up with clay with the additive process and then tearing stuff off and looking how movement happens and gets established in the clay without making it trying to look like anything. If it's non-objective, it does not refer to anything in nature. It's not supposed to have an objective reality out in nature that we are trying to make it look like something. So I was hoping that these would not look like anything from nature, so that they're organic forms and they derive from kind of the movement of life and life forms. They're curvilinear forms, but they really don't look like anything found in nature. That's going to be another super hard, difficult lift. All I can do is promise you that winter quarter, I'm going to try my best to have, you know, nude models in the studio, and I'm going to try to have you guys be available to actually take a class in this studio so that we can sculpt human figures next quarter. I've asked my my dean and the vice president if they can make a special, you know, special permission for us to be able to do that, because that's always been part of my curriculum before. And the more that we learn about COVID and stuff, the more that we find out that if I've got enough social distancing and enough fresh air, and if everybody's wearing a mask and is social distancing and washing your hands and everything else, that maybe, just maybe, we'll be able to do human figure study next quarter. And the price you have to pay for human figure study next quarter is doing something abstract and non-objective this quarter. Sorry, thumbs the brakes. Okay, so I've got clay that is kind of unsupported here. It is moist clay, and it kind of wants to fall down. It kind of can't support itself all by itself. So sometimes I have to make a temporary clay prop and just stick a temporary prop in there that's going to hold up the sculpture. You have to start thinking about temporary props in sculpture, like flying buttresses in Gothic cathedrals. And so this is a temporary prop. It is not supposed to be visually part of the sculpture. It is not a permanent part of the sculpture, so that it can be removed once the sculpture has dried enough, so that it becomes a soft leather hard and can sustain its own shape without needing, you know, a temporary prop in here. But you guys might have to use more clay to become temporary props as you've got movement and things that are kind of cantilevered out into space. Cantilevered out into space, like an arm, like something sticking out into space, might need a temporary prop to hold it up while it is trying to get stiff enough to dry to hold itself up. This is going to be what we're doing, and you're sure welcome if you've already come in and gotten a bag of clay to start this kind of process. What I usually like to do is just get this clay kind of standing up on the board, and you might only work on it for half an hour to get it to this far, and then leave it unwrapped for like 8 hours or something so that it can start to stiffen up, and then, you know, cover it up with a plastic bag or something. And then on Thursday, we'll actually be able to be sculpting on this thing, and it won't just be trying to fall down completely fast every time, because it needs to stiffen up and dry out a little bit. Those of you who really like to add water to your clay, you keep spraying the clay, or you keep, you know, getting water on your hands and massaging water into your clay, that ain't going to work with this sculpture, because this sculpture is going to need to be able to dry out and to stiffen up so that it has some strength to it, some kind of you know, soft leather, hard strength to it, so that it can sustain its own shape while we are refining the form and trying to find our way without any kind of roadmap whatsoever of what's interesting, what is organic about this shape and this form, and how does this form move through itself? How does it move from the top of the piece down to the base? How does it come up and move the viewer's eye around in a different way? We're interested in trying to get the viewer of this sculpture to become engaged in the piece visually, so that they want to walk around the piece 360 degrees and view it from all angles and see the piece from all sides. We'd like the piece to be different and interesting from all sides. And that's kind of, you know, a big, heavy lift, because how does the piece become different from every different side? What are the angles? What is the movement? What are the organic forms? What is the vocabulary of form that we can develop, you know, over time, over sculpting this for a week or a week and a half or so, that can really make this an interesting piece from all sides? And just like in my design class, you have to try to make this have enough harmony so that it holds together visually as a piece. We want to try to create a vocabulary of forms so that forms are sort of repeating themselves with variations on a theme throughout the piece, and it kind of is a cascading of forms through the piece. We want to make the piece interesting. We want to have the piece have different areas of difference and variety in the piece, so that it's got little focal points in the piece where the viewer's eye comes to a rest and then continues on. So there's always going to be these little areas that are interesting, but we don't want them to be so different that the piece is just a whole bunch of different you know, crazy dingleberries that aren't really holding together with a common theme or a common texture or some commonality to them. In my design class, it's always about harmony and variety. Can we have enough harmony in the piece to hold it together visually? Can we have enough variety in the piece to make it interesting, so that there might be, you know, an area of interest, but it also flows, and these areas of interest are kind of related to each other, but they're a little bit different from each other too. That's going to be the big trick, you know, for the non-objective, non-representational, free-form piece. How do we make it work? And so we're going to be exploring that while we're kind of also exploring much more of this process of the additive process of sculpture. So this is kind of a full-on, you know, full contact, full body contact sculpting process, where we're going to be playing with sculptural form and try to see what makes it interesting. From this direction right here, from this view, not so interesting. I have to figure out how to make this view way more interesting and get some of that movement and some things happening, even if I have to build other forms in it. For instance, this this temporary, and I will use air quotes, temporary form right here might actually become a permanent part of the piece. And so the piece might wind up having a negative space in it. It might have a hole in it with a thick part on one side and a thin part on the other side, and the two parts flow together, and then suddenly this is no longer a temporary form, but it might be a permanent form in the piece. And then it wants to have a little bit of S curviness in its vertical form to kind of match up with some of the larger, more massive S curviness on this side. So what I'm presenting to you is the thick side, and then I can flip it around, and maybe there's a little bit of S curviness happening in this thin part. The thing that was a temporary form has now become integrated into the piece, and so we've got a main element and then a secondary element of the piece, but it also creates a certain sense of visual flow that's happening in the piece too. So the idea of organic form, organic flow, is something that we will be exploring with this particular sculpture. It's going to drive you nuts, but that's okay. I do have a really wonderful PowerPoint on abstract art, on non-objective, non-representational art from the middle of the 20th century to show you the stuff that my college teachers made me do when I was in college in the early 1980s, because they were in college in the 1950s when this stuff was happening. And so, you know, this was like an important thing, even though it was like pulling teeth and I hated it and I didn't like it. And now 30 years later, I'm inflicting this on you because it's part of an intellectual set of stuff that we do in this class. It's the, how tall are we shooting for? Okay, we are shooting for over a foot tall. I like 16 inches in height. 16 inches in height would be the thing that I would really shoot for. At minimum, it has to be 12 inches tall, but I'd love 16 inches. If you go 24 inches, that's fine. There really is kind of a size limit, because 24 inches tall becomes much heavier, much more difficult to transport. If it's if it's taller than 25 inches, it won't fit inside my kiln. So, you know, you've got a 25-inch height limit, but 16 inches is really kind of a cool size because it is tabletop size. It's a pedestal size piece that can be really nice either indoors or outdoors. And so that's going to be, but I'm trying to challenge you guys too, so that it is taller than it is wide. I'd like this to be a vertical piece that stands up, that springs off of the board and defies gravity. Gravity is pulling down on our piece all the time. And so to try to get something that's actually tall and that will stand up rather than be a reclining piece or something that responds to gravity, I'd like it to try to defy gravity if at all possible. I'm going to try to make this down just a little bit further to get all the way down to the board and the base of it.
I do have
I'm
questions
going to be
for
down
you.
here like this, talking about this, but this is about 14 to 16 inches tall. The base element, we're really not going to be talking about any kind of a separate base for the sculpture. I'd like the whole sculpture to be an organic form, or a set of organic forms that move all the way down to the base. The only thing about the base that I want us to think about is that I don't want the thing to look like it is rooted into the ground, and I will talk about that later. But I'd like it to have undercuts and some movement even where it attaches to the board, that makes it look like it doesn't flow down into the table, but that it is sitting on top of the table with perhaps some cast shadow elements that go underneath the piece so that it looks like it is liberated somewhat from the tabletop. So this is the beginning of an organic, non-objective, non-representational piece. And I might want to go in here and do a lot more with this massive piece to try to knock down its mass and make it maybe more planar or whatever. This thinner piece over here is a lot more of a linear element. So we are dealing with lines and planes and shapes in a sculpture. But they're all things that we're kind of investigating slowly as we go. And it's supposed to become a non-objective, non-representational piece. So having said all that, I got to turn on everything because there's lots of stuff in the chat that I'm not seeing because I gotta open up the chat here. So let's see. Okay, didn't take measure Groot. Okay, the Zima mask. Okay, how tall are we going for? Can I ask a few questions? Aurora, you shoot. You go ahead.
Sorry, I had to unmute. So my questions are, I had started like kind of mapping out what my ideas for this were, but do you want us to kind of throw that to the wind and just as we're working with the clay, try to get more of an idea working with it?
You can have ideas, coming into it if you want. I don't want to discourage your ideas that you have. And at the same time, I would like this to be a journey that where you don't know exactly where you're headed, so that you're going to kind of find things along the way that are going to create form for the sculpture. I know that is a lot of New Age gobbledygook sometimes, but that's our stock and trade as artists and art teachers. We try to get you
like my ideas were a lot of free flowing, but still like very geometric pattern basically. So I was going to play around with like a spiral and spheres and that kind of thing, which to me are more of like a natural element, but it's definitely not as like abstract as some of the other pieces would be. So I can kind of step back from that because I went as far as to make like a 3D model of what I was trying to get to happen so I could wrap my brain around it. But my other question is, I know you want the base to look like it's sitting on top of it, but what is our width diameter basically? Because I know you want it like 12 to 24 inches high, but how wide can it go? Can it overhang the piece of wood you gave us?
I suppose it could reach out into space a bit. I tried to give you guys a 1 by 1 foot square board just as a way of kind of defining the space that it would occupy. But if you are cantilevering some forms out into space sideways quite a bit, it could probably exceed that. That would be fine. It won't hurt my feelings. I just have to find creative ways of loading it into a kiln. It's fine if you're coming up with spirals or spheres or other kinds of forms that you want to put together in this piece. In the early going, with the additive process and that, I hope that we can make some kind of piece with this additive texture that we're working with. And then maybe, a week into the sculpture or something, if you want to come back with the metal rib and do lots of smoothing, blending kinds of things, that would probably be fine too. In the early going though, and we're just jamming clay together, I want to invite you or encourage you guys to try to get comfortable with the additive texture for now.
That sounds good. I was just curious because I've been doing a lot of research into the abstract sculptures and stuff like that, and I like I said, I had already gone in and made a 3D model of what my idea was so that I could kind of start to form it in that shape, but I didn't want to like overthink this project, if that makes sense.
Well, that's the funny thing, because we're when I do the slideshow next time, we're going to take a deep dive into overthinking things. We're going to look at the sculpture of Hans Arp, or Jean Arp, depending on whether you're knowing him in France or where else would he have been known, maybe Germany or something like that. But he was a surrealist, and so some of his forms are like abstractions of surrealism from the 1930s. And all of his stuff is a lot more about the human figure. And so I've got these strange little pieces over here that are sort of based on art sculptures. And we're going to look at his stuff a lot more. but he was interested in the human body and human body forms, mostly from the torso. And so we see lots of things like breast forms and leg forms and hip forms, but they're put together in abstract and kind of surrealistic ways that are unexpected. And it makes a lot more sense when I show his sculpture next time. We're coming up on 2 o'clock. I think I want to leave it for now. I'd like you guys to try to rough out something like this so that you've just got clay that's vertical on a board. Let it be out for about 8 hours and then cover it with plastic so that it is somewhat stiff, so that we can start working on it on Thursday, and then it will support its own weight and it'll sustain its own shape better if it's already up and maybe has had about 8 hours of drying time in the air first. So let's leave it for now.
I did have one question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. So I didn't get a picture of my sculpture, but you did have the picture. So will you be opening up the that assignment again so that we can upload those pictures?
Yeah, I'm going to open the assignment and I'm going to email all of you the pictures that I have, because now I have a name for each picture. So I'm going to retitle the pictures and email them individually back to you.
Okay, and when will these sculptures that we're working on now, when will they be due?
Well, this is usually a 3-week project. So
Okay.
we start today. We'll be sculpting in earnest on Thursday. We'll see what next week feels like. And if you guys are all fast and get done really quick, it might be a 2-week project. But we will have to chop these apart and hollow them out too. And that takes a day of hemming and hawing with, leather hard elements that need to be hollowed out. So processing this might take a little while too. I guess there's one more thing I can say. I want you guys to start thinking about buying some acrylic paint, possibly at Walmart or someplace cheap. And it can either be a small acrylic paint set of like 6 or 7 colors, or you can just buy individual tubes or bottles. Bottles of acrylic paint at Walmart are like $1.97 a piece for something that's about 4 to 6 ounces of acrylic paint. And if you just get your favorite color and then a bottle of white, that would be great, because we're going to start painting the masks, and I'm going to be doing some demonstrating of paint approaches to sculpture. And that's going to happen in a couple of weeks when the masks are fired and I start getting the masks back to you. So start thinking now about trying to come up with some acrylic paint and a paintbrush in the next week or so. That would be good. All right, anything else for the good of the order today?
I have a question.
Yes.
That's kind of like a side thing. I have both my masks ready, and I know you said I could drop them off today. When would work best for you, today or like Wednesday or?
Today's fine. I'm going to be here for a while. Just bring them to the back porch. You know, the west side of Eden Hall is my little porch area where I've got clay and boards. And you can always drop stuff off there and then pick up more clay and a square board to start this project with.
Okay.
And if I'm not here, just leave them here, because then I'll come back in the evening and I'll bring them inside and they'll be fine. Nobody bothers this stuff throughout the day, so they'll be fine.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Anything else for the good of the order? Anybody else have a question or comment? All right. Well, I will see you guys on Thursday then. Thank you so much and have a good middle of your week.